conscious of ourselves and how we sound, and we don't like how we sound. All right, I'm going to give it a minute, not a minute, just a second of silence. And joining me in the studio now is Layla Beckermann from the Hayward Community School District and Sara Poquette from the LCO School District. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning.
Good morning. So I was seeing a couple of articles. One of them was Governor Evers declaring 2023 the year of mental health. And they were talking about the workforce and how few mental health workers, counselors, other professionals that are available for children. And I started to think about, well, if this is a statewide issue, obviously it's going to be happening here in the Hayward LCO community. And then just the other day, another article came across from Wisconsin Public Media talking again about the shortages, and especially in rural school districts where you have one counselor for 8 districts. And that's a lot just to think about how many districts there are and how far apart they are. Layla, you were talking about how you're the only one right now for the school district. They used to have 2 others in the schools, and now it's just you. How has that affected your job?
Yeah, so right now, Hayward just got maintained a school social worker 2 years ago. Before then, we hadn't had one. So often our school counselors, other staff have fielded those mental health needs or other needs that social workers can help fill in the gaps. So as of last year, the social worker that was at the middle school and high school um, left and is no longer with our district. And so right now I'm the only one, and I'm in 2 buildings, the primary school and intermediate school primarily. And so I feel like it's not just me. I don't want to sound like I carry it all because there's a lot of people filling in the gaps,
Sure. Yeah.
but it is difficult in that a lot of districts, Sarah and I were talking this morning, like Eau Claire School District, for example, right now is posted 5 school social workers. And I know they're a bigger district, but I feel like sometimes I'm not always able to reach student needs as much when I'm one person
Right.
in 2 buildings.
Yeah.
And I work with parents too, and I know Sarah maybe feels some of that as well, just the spread thin. And we can go into this a little bit, but also just in regards to school social work, when you're talking about gaps in services with mental health, we both have at LCO as well as Hayward mental health therapists that come in to do counseling with our students from outside agencies.
Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes, and again, we'll get into this, but there's a lack of services in the sense where they have waiting lists. Kids are waiting a very long time by the end of the school year. Parents are waiting a long time to get kids in. Some parents have the ability to go bring them elsewhere, but even elsewhere, that's hard to get people in. So often your school social workers or school counselors are able to kind of band-aid or field some of those things and meet with students until they're able to get into a more intense therapy. So, whether parents, students utilize that or not, but it is, something
Yeah.
we're trying to do.
Yeah. Right. Sarah, speak to what's happening at LCO schools.
So at LCO, we have a very large counseling team, and we are fortunate to have an art therapist who's been there for many, many
Oh.
years. And so part of the team, we do have a therapist that comes in from Bajiki Wellness Center from behavioral health. She comes in 2.5 days a week. We've had a long-standing relationship with Bajiki. They've always provided 1 or 2 therapists that come in. She's the sole clinician right now, so
Okay.
we are definitely fortunate to be holding on to her those 2.5 days a week. And we are looking into getting some other providers at school as well from a different agency to help meet needs. We have 30 children right now who are being seen in 2.5 days. Well, if you do the math, that's not very good math, right?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
people aren't, the students are not being seen every week, but some of them don't need to be seen every week. We definitely have filled gaps with our art therapist. She is a special education position, but she comes an extra day a week just for regular ed kids,
Mhm.
and she does groups, and she's just been I don't know what we would have done without her post-COVID for sure.
Yeah.
So she's fun and the kids love her. But we also have a health navigator who came on during COVID, and she also helps fill those gaps as far as, helping us get kids to appointments, getting paperwork done, getting just making connections with families regarding health issues too. So we've been really fortunate, and we've been trying to prioritize mental health for a very long time. It's really difficult because if, I don't have the citation on right now, but, like 80% of kids in the United States who are receiving mental health services are receiving them at school. So
Wow.
we need to make
Wow.
sure that,
Yeah.
we're getting the backing that we need to in order to
Mhm.
provide as many services as possible. I mean, including our special education kids and our therapy kids and kids who receive outside services. I mean, we have tons and tons. I would say, at least 100 kids getting some kind of therapeutic services through a clinician at our school. And that's
Wow.
that's a huge number. We're just trying to meet the kids and the families where they're at. And
Mhm.
it is difficult, I think, as a working mom. I can tell you it's difficult to schedule an appointment with a therapist and be able to take your kid to those appointments,
Yeah.
taking off work and,
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
doing those things. And then, like Layla said, just getting in. A lot
Yeah.
of places are
Mhm.
booked out months ahead of time, and there's just a lack of clinicians, I think.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
it's not, there aren't any clinicians in the area just kind of sitting around going, oh, I wish I had clients.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right. One of the things I was struck by is now that we have such a shortage, but in how are these kids getting the help that they need if there's such a long waiting list? I know we as adults are not recovering well from COVID.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of that can get passed down to the students in the home, which
Mhm.
compounds the issue. And now they have to wait. What are some of let's talk about some of the issues that you're seeing, or what should I say, the outside um, symptoms that you're seeing, and what are some of the root causes? Layla, we'll
Mhm.
start with you.
Sure. Some of the things that we're seeing a lot this year, specifically at the primary school, and it relates to mental health, is a large number of 4K and elementary students being evaluated for special ed. And can mark my words, I think there's going to be some books on this in the next few years
Mm,
post COVID, because a lot of these students who are 4 to 5, when COVID was happening and they were at home, those developmental ages at 2 and 3, where they were able to go to grocery stores with mom and dad, or mom or dad. They were able to be with other kids. They were able to socialize, those natural skills that they learn
yeah.
socially just by being around other people. They're lacking. So we're seeing a lot of kids, high numbers, being like 2 years behind developmentally. So
Mm,
sometimes, and I see that not just in the primary school, even in the intermediate school where we're grades 3 through 5, I see a lot of those students. Teachers are concerned about a certain student's emotional behavior, and then you watch and you see that they're developmentally 2 years behind socially. And I just think that a big part of that is COVID, because kids were home.
yeah.
They weren't able to socialize, and I just see it more prominently in those elementary grades, our 4K program and kindergarten, where there's a high need for those things. I feel like parents, even, I work with a lot of parents at the primary school level, just
Sure.
because, let's be real, like primary school kids, the parents are the reason they're having issues
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
all of us. And I feel like I see a lot of parents just kind of coming out of COVID too, like not quite knowing what to do. And I sometimes remind staff that we're a teaching school, not just for students, but for families, because, we all kind of survived it. Like we all did the best we could, and
Right. Yeah.
we're all kind of coming out of it going, how, and some of us have more skills than others. So those are some, I feel like that really relates to mental health, just the social and emotional well-being of students, and what they, at the younger levels, even like where they're expected to be and where they are emotionally and
Yeah.
socially.
I never thought about that social interaction for those early years and how
Mhm.
important that is, because I'm looking at middle school and high school students saying, you know, anxiety and panic and what other, more older student issues are there in reaction to that, not just, the natural. Um, Sarah,
Mhm.
what's happening at in your schools as far as elementary age? Let's finish with her subject.
Definitely, we have some of those students who did not have a super social experience during COVID, and maybe attendance at Head Start or other places wasn't real great. And so then you have these kids who are, here's kindergarten, pre-K. Our pre-K kids are amazing, but we have some kindergartners who are like, I'm not sure what I'm doing here, and
Mm,
at times really flourish and are growing in some areas, but socially it is an absolute struggle.
Mhm.
When I think about just in general, I think a lot of those kids do phenomenal one-on-one, and
Mhm.
so, I spend a lot of time with kids one-on-one, so then, from my perspective, I'm like, "Oh, this kid's doing great, look at all the things they can do," and then I turn around and I walk out of the classroom, and then I'm getting radioed to go back in because something just happened.
sure.
So it's, I know that we kind of get some backlash, about blaming COVID, quote, unquote,
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
but I'll tell you, it's real, and, kids of all ages are just not used to where we need them to be at, and it is difficult. It's absolutely difficult. Not everybody comes to school ready to learn.
Hmm.
Mhm.
And I think COVID compounded that by quite a bit.
I'm wondering too if that antisocial element, as you guys are talking about this, they get that one-on-one, which they had on the screen. To them, it was a one-on-one conversation, and they get in class, and there's just so many distractions.
Mhm.
Is that what you're seeing? Is that behavioral issue is distraction, or is it something different? Different. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, from my perspective, and I'm not in any way claiming to be an educator because I am a social worker
Yeah.
working in an education system. So you might have to ask the people more,
Right.
equipped to answer this. But sometimes what I hear from staff and what I see is that it's more about students, especially at those younger ages. They haven't learned how to, what's the right word I'm looking for? Like equip, or they don't know the skills on how to handle a situation because they haven't had to. So then coping skills, that's the word I'm looking for, coping skills.
Hmm.
So those coping skills and what we do in a classroom when Johnny is throwing himself on my feet because I don't want to play with him or whatever, our coping skills as a kid, we're as adults, I feel like lost some of those coping skills, and then we're expecting kids to like figure all that out, right? Like, so I think it's the coping skills more than the distractions, if
Okay.
that makes sense. Like
Sure.
it's, they haven't had to cope. I always look at, and I have a background in mental health, and I look at one of the ways that you avoid, or one of the ways you increase anxiety is by avoiding anxiety ridden situations. So for me, like I look at our kids, and we can segue to into middle school and high school because it I think relates to them as well, is those kids who are maybe already a little uncomfortable in social situations, now that increased, and so the more they avoid those situations, and again as well as adults, the harder it will be for them.
Hmm.
um, so I I think that's a big piece of it.
Oh, absolutely. And you take those middle school, high school kids who potentially have some anxiety or things going on,
Mhm.
and they've been home
Mhm.
in their
Hmm.
bedroom on their phone.
Yeah.
And, don't get me started on screen time because we'll be here all
Mhm.
day.
Yeah.
But,
Mhm.
the early research on screen time, it's terrifying. Nothing good is really coming out of it unless it's educational use. And I got to tell you, they're getting their educational use of screen time during the day at school. So, that doesn't really
Hmm.
leave any room for screen time
Yeah.
anywhere else.
Yeah.
But, you have a group of, potentially adolescents, late adolescents who are like, I don't want to go to school and I don't want to do anything. I'm used to just kind of being at home doing my own thing. And,
Mhm.
we have some kids who fall through the cracks during those times, and that is terrifying also because,
Mhm.
they're all our kids and we want them all to be safe and successful. And,
Mhm.
they've got a lot going on, and, if they're too anxious to be in school, it really can be a huge barrier.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And even those, like, piggybacking off what you said, those self-regulation skills, so coping skills, self-regulation skills, some of those with that screen time, and we're seeing, we both study this with that screen time, they've studied the brain, and it actually does the same to the brain as trauma to a kid the screen time. So some
Wow.
of these kids then when they've pictures of the brain, it's like they're going through multiple traumatic situations, and then we're expecting them to not be in fight or flight in school when they've been on a computer or TV or screen for a year, and now at home. So I feel like some of those habits have just continued, and then we have a lot of kids who aren't self-regulated. Like they come to school and they're not in the right frame of mind, like you said, to be able to learn.
Yeah.
Right, they're not using that part of your brain. You can I'll be a geek for a second here, but I always think of the brain as like a picture of a hand.
Mm-hmm.
And when your hand is closed, like in a fist, and you're operating out of the bottom part of your brain, which is where you learn.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And then when you open it, you're in fight or flight, right? So like the screen time trauma makes you in that fight or flight mode where your hands open up.
Sure.
Right. So then you're not operating in that lower part of your brain. And that's kids and adults. So I feel like our kids, that's often what a lot of them are experiencing.
Sure.
They don't know how to self-regulate, bring themselves back.
What things did you hear from parents as the kids were home and now the parents have become teachers or regulators at least? I feel sorry for home educators, because to be the parent hat on this end and then the teacher hat over here, kids have a hard time understanding which hat is being worn at the time, and they always think it's the parent all the time, and they're annoying and they're bugging me and I can't do this. So they go in their room and they close the door and they pull out their screens and they're not doing schoolwork. But what have you been hearing from parents?
I think part of it is that a lot of parents were working.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so,
Somebody had to stop working to be home.
potentially,
Yeah.
yeah. And then you have kids at home and you're like, okay, you need to get this, and this done while I'm at work today. And guess what? It didn't happen.
Yeah.
It absolutely was not happening. I mean, I can speak from a personal standpoint. I had a first grader who cried every single day, because all he wanted was Mrs. Berger,
Wow.
his teacher. That's all he
Yeah.
wanted. And I was definitely not her. But and I just remember those days of like turning in the homework, and it was just like such a relief, and it was so stressful.
Oh.
I've seen lots of parents, like, I don't know what they do all day long, but I have to work. So, I tell them to do their homework, and as a single parent, like, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
You come home and you can only, you want to love your kids and then harass them about not doing their work. It's so frustrating. Yeah, I don't claim to be an educator. I do teach a little bit here and there at school, but full time.
Yeah.
Kudos to those people, because
Right.
They're saints, really.
Yeah.
absolutely.
And Layla, you have older children. How was that for you? If
I
we can,
do. Yeah. For me personally, and I am not discounting the hard, but I loved having my kids home. And don't get me wrong, there were lots of pieces that were hard, but I was also privileged enough to be able to be home with them. And I didn't have to go to work every day, which had good and bad. Like I was one of those parents also that was ready for them to go back, and kids need other adults in their lives. And there's things that they hear from other people.
Yeah.
And that, like I said, educators are saints, and they're able to teach in a way that I can't always teach, because that's not my lane. Right.
Yeah.
And they know their lane, and they do well at challenging my kids. One thing, not like personally, but one thing I saw too is, and Sarah maybe will attest to this too, is I feel like in our school, what I saw coming back from that, whether it's myself or someone else, like that socioeconomic gap with academics got bigger, because parents who either one had some education themselves, two were privileged enough to be home with their kids. There are lots of different things, but different reasons that it made those gaps in academics bigger, because there were kids who maybe excelled a little, maybe if they were older, maybe they were more self-sufficient. I will tell you, this doesn't really have to do with my job, but bringing it back personal, I had a college student too during that time, during COVID, and I wouldn't say he excelled. I'd say he went backwards, because him learning and self-studying was like he's graduating, Lord willing, this weekend or this month, next month. So that's a good thing. He is, but I just feel like those kids in college even were, that was definitely a disservice to them, because they didn't learn. So for me, I felt like I watched him, but now my younger two, who are older kids, they're 12 and 14, um, they are girls, not to be gender specific because it's not, but just happen to be girls, and they're more self motivated. Where my son, I feel like even being in college, and so I see kids, if the genders were reversed or the personalities were reversed, it would look different too. Right? Like my girls were pretty self motivated and they were like wanting to learn. Can we learn to type? Can you show us how to do this? Where my son would have been like, can I go shoot squirrels? Like he's like not right. So like as a college student, even he's like, what little can I do as possible? Like I'm not learning
Yeah.
anything from this Zoom stuff,
Yeah, right.
So so I feel like that all of those things play a factor. And the gaps I feel like got bigger.
Yeah.
There's more extremes. I don't know if you see that at LCO, but we see that in Hayward, the gaps.
Yeah, so there are some instances where kids were really surprising. We had a gal who really struggled with reading, and she says, I mastered reading with closed captioning. And I got to
Okay.
tell you, it's stories like that where I'm like, oh, good. Some
Yeah.
good things happened
Mhm.
during COVID.
Mm.
And some of those, my oldest, he would do a week packet of work in a day and then be like, okay, I'm off to,
Mm.
I'll be on the Xbox or whatever.
Yeah.
But those gaps are huge, and it's really, really hard on our intervention staff because we only have so much intervention staff. And we just recently lost one of our math interventionists also. So that's been difficult, but it is just, there is not enough, we have to accept the gaps, and
Right.
we have
Mhm.
to, as an education
Mhm.
society, like we together have to say it's okay for the kids to be where they're at.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I got to hand it to the teachers and the interventionists because
Mhm.
it is so important that the kids are getting that time with them. And some of them did do really great on their own. And I think that really speaks to, their abilities and the support that they had at home and things like that. I know there's lots of aunties, uncles, grandmas, and grandpas picking up laptops and
Mhm.
picking up
Right.
work and
Yeah.
dropping off stuff and making phone calls, which is amazing because literally it really does take a village. And
Mhm.
the kids, some of them really shined, and some of them, it's been really hard coming back. They
Mhm.
would just much rather be kind of home, kick back, and, getting
Mhm.
them to come to school and
Yeah.
do what they need to do is
Mhm.
really hard. And it's a stressful time of year too. We got those
Mhm.
seniors trying to pull it together.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
have you seen in your schools, since we're shorthanded and you have to rely on teachers, administrators to help pull up the slack, I'm sure some of them are already, just by nature, because of what they do and they're working closely with these kids every day, they're kind of like the first responders. They can see when
Mhm.
something's happening, and then they got to call 911, which is your phone number, and say, hey, we need some, and you got to put the fire out. But like you said, long term, that fire can smolder for a longer period of time and even reignite in a different scenario, different situation outside the school that you have no control over.
Mhm.
Not that you have any control on the inside either, but
Mhm.
how, wow. I'm assuming the staff is saying we need help because we don't have enough counselors. Administrators are going to their people and saying we need help. The districts now go to the state, and hopefully, what Governor Evers is doing and bringing that awareness that there's some funding that I don't want to get politics involved, but it all relies on funding at some point,
Oh.
and you guys can't solve that. You're almost, about your head's above or below water, just trying to tread water.
So
Mhm.
there is a position posted through the Bajiki Wellness Center for school-based mental health, and it's
Okay.
been posted for quite a while. So if anybody knows anybody,
Yeah.
check it out.
Yeah.
So there has been some additional resources. We just got to get the warm bodies who want to
Yeah.
live in Hayward,
Right.
Wisconsin.
Yes. And
And of course,
utilize
you're
mental health.
competing with all the other rural communities and urban communities. If Eau Claire is still hurting for that, it's like,
Mhm.
wow.
Yeah. I mean, even in a perfect world, and this is real selfishly motivated, just because I think it makes a big difference. Um, in a perfect world, I'd like to see one social worker in each building at each grade level.
Sure.
That may never happen, may never happen at your building. But I know both Sarah and I have similar. We're also both doing our masters right now, so we're like literally inundated
Yeah.
in social work things, and I feel like one thing I see is that not only everyone else, but we're also spread thin. So I feel like, for me personally, I don't feel like I'm always giving social work like its best effort that it could be, because I'm spread thin between
Right.
different buildings and different because social workers are, social workers, school counselors, we are the mental health professionals in our building.
Yeah.
We're not therapists, nor am I claiming to be a therapist,
Right.
but we are capable of doing those things, right? And so we can provide some support to students and staff in regards to mental health until they're able to get into a therapist,
Right.
until
Yeah.
right. And we are also able to field whether this is something we can see them for a couple times and kind of help them solve their issue, or problem, or help them cope with what they have going on, learn coping skills. And then we're qualified to say, yeah, this is beyond my scope. They need some therapy, right?
Mhm.
Outside of us.
Right.
I don't know if you'd agree to that, but
Yep,
I think
absolutely.
that's what I see. So I think that and I think our schools are moving that direction. And like you said, funding is a big part of it. So I'm hoping that funding will continue because, like I said, Hayward, when they hired a school social worker, I don't know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it's the first time they've ever had one. And we live in a county with like, what is it, over 50% free and reduced lunches. Like, we have high poverty rates, high alcohol and drug use, high.
Mhm.
And so the fact that we don't have social workers in place in those places.
Well, and with the, Wisconsin county health rankings, Sawyer
Mhm.
County is always in the top 5.
Sure.
And when you're beating out counties like Milwaukee, it's
Mhm.
it's a little scary for
Yep.
sure.
Yeah.
And we prior to me coming on board 8 years ago, there was a brief amount of time where there was no school social worker, but prior to that, there was one for a few years. So this has kind of been a long-standing thing for LCO. We also used to have a full-time school-based therapist also, but we don't have that position right
Mhm.
now. So
Mhm.
something that we posted for quite a while before COVID, and it just didn't happen. So
Mhm.
we took up our mental health navigator position, and she's phenomenal. So we have a good team, and we all work together. And yeah, it's never a lack of things to do.
Yeah.
It's a busy,
So you're
busy
seeing,
position.
you're seeing attention issues in the school classroom for the younger kids. How are the older kids, high schoolers, adjusting, or have they adjusted?
Not well.
No.
Not well. We have used, our administration has really pumped up incentive-based things for our students. I know there right now there's an attendance incentive for a certain part of the fourth quarter. I think it's all of the fourth quarter actually. If you have less than 2 absences,
Yeah.
you go to Valley Fair. So they do fun stuff like that. We do random attendance rewards. If you're here, here's a, treat, or we did chili
Sure.
bar,
Yeah.
just little things to try to incentivize. I know academically the teachers are putting attendance more into grading, to try to motivate kids to want to be there. It is extremely difficult. They are not super excited about being there, everybody. I mean, thank goodness for sports, because that gets a lot of kids on track and
Mhm.
keeps them on track at least
Right.
during that season, which is
Right.
wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
But I know it's a struggle, and I know the teachers really do a ton to try to get kids engaged and to get them on board, and it's really hard.
Yeah. And that means, if you don't mind me piggybacking, that means a lot, because what we know about mental health is there are always underlying issues, right, of inclusion and feeling like you want to be there. And we're always saying at Hayward, and I used to be at LCO a long time ago, so I'm going to make some assumptions that I'm almost sure they feel the same, where we want to be a place kids want to be. And we
Absolutely.
care
Yeah.
about kids, and we want them to come there. We want what's best for kids. Hayward last year as a district, all buildings, younger and older, this year, and then it will continue into next year. They call it the Be the One initiative, and our superintendent Craig Olson is always talking to staff about be the one for each student. So if you're the one for this one student in the hallway, that's a student who may not struggle wanting to come to school, like, and
Yeah,
those things
right.
make a big difference. So, this be the one is like, I mean, it's in our constant conversation of be the one for a student, even if it's not your student, or even, in
Right.
conversation, and I see that in all 4 buildings. Staff is trying to be in the hallways, talking to students in the morning, be a place, and LCO does a great job of that too, like just including, kids, make it a place they want to be. So it's not just about the academics, that part is there, but also like, because I do think there's kids who after COVID, there's kids who don't want to be there, but I also think there's kids, whether they want to admit it or not, developmentally, who are glad that there's some consistency and routine.
Yeah.
And they look
Oh,
forward to
yeah.
those 2 meals a day. They look
Mhm.
forward to seeing Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so every day, like they're, so I think that's important. And it sounds simple, but it is not as simple as you would think.
Yeah.
No, and we, our number one priority is relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And we've literally mapped out, the entire high school and, had the staff go through, is this one of your kids? Is
Mhm.
this one of the kids that can come to you if they need something?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just part of our, our school-wide
Mm-hmm.
goals that we've worked towards to make sure that those relationships are in place. And
Mm-hmm.
they definitely are. I mean, our senior advisor, Wendy, she makes dessert, makes cake or brownies for the seniors when it's their birthday. And, it's those little things that,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
they know how much the staff care about them. And,
Mm-hmm.
most of the time we're a big family. And I got to tell you, our big family's getting bigger because pre-COVID, we were sitting at about 300. And today we're sitting at about 400.
Wow.
And so for
Yeah.
our little tiny school to increase that much, it has definitely been a challenge. But just learning all these new kids, pre-COVID, I knew every kid, every 300 kids, I knew all of them. Now with the transfer kids, it's like, oh, who's that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's going
Yeah.
on here?
Somebody new.
Yeah, so it's been a challenge, but we're certainly doing the best we can to make sure that the kids know that we're on their team and we want them to be successful.
So let's talk to the community. What can the community do to help the situation besides paying more taxes, to pay for the budgets, to pay for more people in there? How can the community be involved, and what suggestions do you have for them to help the students that are in the schools and having these? Every single one of them is having an issue. It's just the level of the issue that's there, but the root of it, I think, is still there. So how can the community help?
I think the best thing that families and friends can do for students is to really take an interest in their education and
Mm-hmm.
to send that positive message of how important education is. Culturally, we've struggled with that over the years, and we really want families to prioritize their students' education, whether they're in kindergarten or a senior. We want them to make education the most important part of their day. And I tell my kids, like, you have one job. It's to be a student.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And being an athlete and working or those other things, those are extra, but we really need that clear, consistent message from everybody in a child's life that
Mm-hmm.
education is the key to success for them. And that's definitely, I think COVID, we had to put everything on the back burner, and
Yeah.
we really
Mm-hmm.
need the community's help to take that next step to
Mhm.
say, we got to get back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this might be for another broadcast, but that historical trauma is real. That education, specifically by our Native people, is not seen as important. So like that's something we constantly combat. And then like COVID brought everybody. It wasn't anybody's priority, and now
Yeah.
bringing that back, because I would just ditto that too. That like, yes, your education is important, and I think just reiterating that as parents, community members, like it's important that you're in school, because when you're not there, you're not learning. So even like these interventions Sarah's talking about that kind of help with whether it be academics or even mental health as a whole, if they're not there, those interventions can't be in place, and
Right.
those staff can't build relationship and things like that. The other thing I would encourage the community is that, and I try to stay strength based, but I also have used this term that I don't have a magic wand, and neither does Sara, neither do our educators. So just some grace for our education community, that they're doing the best they can too, and they care about kids. So just always thinking as a community that they have the students' best interest in mind, and they may not do that perfectly. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that we're all doing it perfectly,
Right. Yeah.
but it's not without intent, being that we care about kids. I know our superintendent says that, and I'm sure admin at LCO says that too. Like, we care about kids and we put kids first. And so, I think just support of the teams, that continue, because that stems down. I mean, we know, like, if staff don't feel appreciated, the shows, our kids are smart. They see it, whether we're saying it or talking about it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it all stems down and affects their kids, right? So, yeah, I think making education important, and then just having some grace and support for the community.
And being visible is huge. Whenever we have like basketball games or track meets, and people are cheering and people are showing up, the kids, they're on fire about it. They just love it. They think it's the most amazing thing when these, kind of random people just show up and are watching them and cheering for them. And, so those are the things too. We have like graduation powwow coming up, and we have tons of stuff where it's like, if the community wants to come, they can be there. Thank goodness, now that COVID's over.
Yeah, right. I know, you can get out.
And kids thoroughly enjoy that. They absolutely love having the community kind of active, it's so nice.
Yeah, I know, especially as the school year is winding down, they got a lot of projects to work on and displays to make, and the younger kids have their science project or whatever else is going on. I noticed dance recitals are coming up, and the shows for that, and how kids can be involved in the extracurricular things, not so much sports, but just be involved and be outside in the community. You got kids that are working with horses and the disciplines that come along with that. It's it's just getting the kids involved in something, especially even after school, just so that social element is in there. Ladies, thank you so much for coming in. I appreciate it. We are going to have to continue this conversation.
Sounds good.
So
yeah, sounds good.
Appreciate you. Layla Beckermann from the Hayward School District, and Sara Poquette from the LCO School District. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.